as advised. I just want to quickly remind everyone that I do have a Patreon, and the 12 Days of Terror countdown will begin next week over on Patreon. So if you want to check that out, the link is in the description box, and I would be very, very grateful for your support over there. YouTube has really been restricting pretty much all of my videos lately, so if you are a fan of this channel and you want to support me, that is a great way to do so. So, let's go ahead and get started. Today we will be talking about the disappearance of Teresa Lynn Butler. Teresa Lynn Butler was born on November 26th, 1970 in Gideon, Missouri, which is this super small town of about 1,000 people. She is described as being a very shy but very loving person. Teresa met her husband, Dale Butler, and they fell in love and soon were married. They ended up having 2 little boys, Gavin and Karen. Now, Teresa worked at Walmart, and she would work during the day, and then Dale worked the night shift, and so they struggled quite a bit financially, but they were both willing to try and, work hard to provide for their family. Despite the financial struggles, the couple seemed to have a great marriage. On January 24th, 2006, the day was just any normal day for the family. Teresa got up and went to work, and then after work she came back home and she made dinner for her family. Then she took the boys outside to play. She wanted them to, have some fresh air before putting them to bed. And while they were outside, Dale was getting ready for work. He worked the graveyard shift at Maverick Tube, which was about 60 miles from their home. So Dale leaves for work around 5, and Teresa heads over to her sister-in-law's house with her boys. Her sister-in-law, Sarah Buchanan, is married to Teresa's sister, and these two were very close. So they kind of spent some time just hanging out. Sarah would later say there was nothing out of the ordinary this night. Teresa didn't seem, upset or anything. It was just totally normal. So Teresa is spending time with Sarah, and then Sarah asks if she can come over and use their computer. So Teresa and the boys go home in Teresa's Jeep, and Sarah follows her, and she, is at their house for a little while, and then she headed home around 9 p.m. According to Donald, Sarah's husband, she got home at 9:05 that night. Sarah would have had no way of knowing that this would be the last time she would ever see Teresa alive. In fact, this is the last confirmed time anyone ever saw Teresa alive. Police would later pull phone records, and they would see that Teresa had spoken with another family member around 10 p.m. that night. Then, around 11, Dale called home to was his normal routine. He didn't always talk to his wife because of where he worked and how much metal was in the building. Sometimes his calls couldn't connect, and sometimes when he called, Teresa was already asleep because she had already had a very full day. She had worked, she had been taking care of her family, but he did try to call most nights. So on this night, he goes home and Teresa doesn't answer, and he assumes that she just fell asleep and doesn't really think anything of it. The next morning, he leaves work and he doesn't go directly home. He actually had plans to meet his mother for breakfast. After eating breakfast, he headed home. As he pulled into the driveway, everything looked normal from the outside. Teresa's Jeep was in the driveway. The front door was locked, but as he entered the home, he began to realize something was off. Something was wrong. He peeked into his boys' bedroom and realized both of their beds were empty. And Teresa wasn't up. She wasn't in the kitchen. She wasn't, wandering around the house. He goes into his bedroom where he finds his oldest son huddled under the covers in their bed, and his youngest son, Garrett, who is still in diapers, in a diaper that obviously hadn't been changed for hours, and he's laying there sucking an empty bottle. Dale began searching his home, kind of yelling out for Teresa, but he got no answer. Then he thought maybe Teresa just ran to a friend's house really quick, but deep down he knew that didn't happen because he knew his wife would never leave their two young children home alone. But he decides to call her friends to see if maybe she did leave the kids home alone, but no one has seen or heard from Teresa. Now, as he begins calling around, he notices Teresa's black leather jacket, and this jacket, she just wore it everywhere. She never left the house without her jacket, so he just feels like something is very wrong. None of this is making sense to him. He's very worried and he's very concerned. However, Dale doesn't call the police, and this would later be something that would create some suspicion around Dale. It would be Teresa's sister-in-law, Sarah, who would make the call to police and report her missing. After Dale called Sarah looking for Teresa, Sarah also realized something was definitely wrong. This was so out of character for Teresa. And so she made the decision to alert police right away. Police were dispatched to the Butler home, and at first they really weren't very concerned. They did treat her as a missing persons case, but they kind of did this search of the home, and nothing really indicated that foul play had been involved. Teresa's Jeep was still parked in the driveway. The house was clean. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle. There were no obvious signs of, blood in the home. So investigators weren't really sure what to think, but it did appear that she just kind of disappeared. They asked Dale to take suspicious. He noticed several things were missing from the home. Dale noted that a PlayStation, a Nintendo GameCube, and several games were gone, along with a large flashlight, a digital camera, a video camera, Teresa's purse, and her cell phone. Later, investigators would also learn that the CD player out of her Jeep had been taken. Investigators at this point decided to do a more thorough search of the home, and they found Teresa's wedding rings under the couch. Now, according to Dale, she never took off her wedding rings unless she was climbing into bed. So she wouldn't have just thrown them on the floor near the couch. The placement just didn't make sense. The police took the wedding rings as evidence. Along with the rings, they also took one of the locks that was part of the doorknob of one of the doors. This lock had a key that had the tip broken off of the key, and it was stuck in the lock. Police never released more information about this lock. They never said which door it came from or if they knew whose key was stuck in it. With this new evidence, it started to seem much more likely that Teresa had been a victim of foul play. Most likely a home invasion. They believed that she had been taken by her intruders, or she had possibly tried to run away from the intruders and had gotten hurt or disoriented somehow. So, because of the items that were taken from the Butler's home, police did theorize that they were dealing with a very inexperienced thief or a young, probably teenager. Whoever had taken the items had taken things that were easy to pawn and harder to trace. Teresa's Jeep was still out front, so that's what made police think this may be a very young thief. Because there were no signs of forced entry and no signs of a struggle, it also was believed that Teresa may have known her assailant and let them in or left willingly with them. What we do know is it doesn't seem like Teresa put up a fight, but police later found that the light bulb above her front porch had been unscrewed. So then they're thinking maybe someone came to the door, but they unscrewed the light bulb. She didn't see who it was, she couldn't look out the window and tell, so she opened the door and then someone forced their way inside. However, when Dale came home, all of the doors were locked. Police really needed to establish a timeline to try to figure out when Teresa went missing. They knew that she spoke to a family member at 10 p.m. and they knew that she did not answer the phone at 11 p.m. when Dale called. But they didn't know if she had been taken in this 1 hour window, or if she had fallen asleep and then later someone came in and took her. Investigators ended up getting a warrant for her cell phone records and noticed that after her 10 p.m. call, there were 2 more calls. And these calls are so weird. These are just, super mysterious in this case. So, the first call was made at 3:16 super early in the morning, and then he noticed that he had a missed call, but he didn't recognize the number. Police really looked hard at this man as a suspect, but they could not connect him to Teresa at all, like in any way. And they did rule him out as a suspect. No one in Teresa's family knew this man, like he was just a totally random man who got a phone call from her telephone. The second call was made from Teresa's phone to a home in Clarkton, Missouri. And this call was made after Teresa had gone missing. Now, there were two really old ladies who lived in this home. Their husbands had both died, and they moved in together so they wouldn't be alone. One of them had answered the phone call and said hello repeatedly, but no one answered, so she just hung up. And she didn't know Teresa. Again, police were never able to connect Teresa to these two calls at all. Now, it's possible maybe Teresa dialed these numbers and she was confused and just misdialed and really did end up getting to totally random people, or perhaps whoever took Teresa used the phone. These two phone calls would end up leaving police with more questions than answers, and they still remain a mystery to this day. Police searched the area surrounding the home, including a large ditch. They searched on foot. There were people on horses. They brought in helicopters, but they never found any sign of Teresa. Police took a thorough look into Teresa's life, trying to see if she had any enemies. Her family and friends all swore that she had no enemies. Everyone loved Teresa, but they did find someone who probably didn't love Teresa. Before Dale and Teresa had been married, Dale had been married to another woman, and they had a son together. And apparently, this ex-wife of Dale's called Teresa at work several times and kind of harassed her. Her coworkers never knew exactly what was said in these phone calls, but they did say that they really seemed to upset Teresa. When Dale heard about this, when Dale heard that police were thinking maybe his ex-wife was involved, he kind of came to his ex-wife's defense and was like, no, we all got along really well. We co-parented these kids together. I don't think she was involved at all. While there was no evidence to suggest the ex-wife, the timing of Teresa's disappearance was odd because Dale's ex-wife's new husband had filed for divorce just days before Teresa went missing. So police wondered if maybe she was just so upset and she took it out on Teresa. As time went on, Teresa's family became very frustrated with the lack of progress in the case, and they were very angry, but also mostly just devastated at the lack of attention the media was giving her. They would later say that they felt Teresa's case wasn't given priority because Teresa was from a very low-income family, and if she had money, people would have cared more. And this really upset them because no matter how much money Teresa had, She was still a human, and her story still deserved to be told, and it just wasn't. No one was talking about it. Investigators did very thoroughly look at Dale, Teresa's husband, as a suspect in this case. But he had a very solid alibi, and they later came out and said he was not a person of interest. 4 months after Teresa went missing, they officially said they believed foul play was involved. Police did receive tips about Teresa's case over time, but none of them really panned out. And then they got a tip from a pretty unlikely tipster. A local drug dealer called in to the tip hotline and told police that he had been owed some money, and this person that owed him the money didn't have any money, so he had given him this video recorder to even out this debt. He was given this camera 24 hours after Teresa went missing, and when he turned it on and looked at it, there was video footage on it of Teresa, and he knew this may be connected to her disappearance, but he was too nervous to come forward right away. He finally called the tip line and told police where they could find it, and they were told it had been dropped into a ditch. So they go out, they look in this ditch, and they do find a camera. But it had no tape inside of it, no record that would prove it was Teresa's. And the serial number had been worn off from being in the water, so they were not even able to verify that it was her camera. So this tipster was considered a suspect by police, and they interviewed him, and they couldn't rule him out as a suspect, but they could not tie him to the case either. The case then just kind of went cold. Police did say that they had a few suspects, but they just had nothing to tie them to this case. And then, 13 years later, in November of 2019, police arrested 42-year-old Melvin Ray Hufford Jr. on first-degree involuntary manslaughter charges and tampering with physical evidence in the Teresa Butler case. So, according to police, Melvin had always been on their radar. His name had come up within the first 48 hours of the investigation, but they had absolutely nothing to tie him to the case. But they kept a very close watch on Melvin. Melvin was eventually arrested on some other charges, and he was incarcerated. And while he was in jail, he developed this relationship with an investigator, and eventually he confessed what had happened with Teresa. He basically just felt like he needed to get it off of his chest because it was too heavy a burden for him to carry around anymore. According to Melvin, this is what happened the night Teresa Butler went missing. He had gone over to Teresa's house, and he claimed he was with another guy, and he named this other guy. But then police followed up on this, and they think he was lying. This other guy was not involved, and they're not sure why he even named this other guy, but he did. So he claims that him and another man went over to Teresa's house, and they she wasn't breathing. Then they freaked out and took her body and hid it. And then they came back and stole some electronics to make it look like it had been a robbery. Melvin Hufford had a pretty extensive history of felony crimes, and he had been sentenced to prison 6 different times since 1997. He had drug charges, weapons offenses, assault charges, and he was even charged with tampering with a witness in a federal case. So Melvin ended up being sentenced to 10 years in connection with Teresa's disappearance, and these charges stem from giving Teresa a fatal dose of methamphetamine and tampering with physical evidence for moving her body. While the family was able to get some closure, they didn't feel like his sentence was as long as they would have hoped, but they were glad they finally had answers. I just want to point out a couple things. So, like I said, there's not a ton of information about this case. I don't know if Teresa had a history of drug abuse. She obviously was doing drugs with other men when her husband was gone. All I can think about is those 2 little boys, and even though I think it's a pretty crappy thing that happened, instead of calling 911, they just hid her body. I am glad that those little boys were not harmed and that they did lock the little boys in the house, because that's just so sad. Anyway, I just want to quickly cite my sources. I got information from standarddemocrat.com, an article by David Jenkins titled "After 13 Years, Arrest Made in the Teresa Butler Case." KFVS.com, an article by Kathy Sweeney titled "Man Sentenced to 10 Years in Connection to the Teresa Butler Cold Case." The Charlie Project had information about this case. FindTeresaButler.com had information, and I also got an article from Medium.com by Kat Lay titled "Mother Vanished While Kids Home Alone." Let me know